The backstory to this is pretty short, and I won't bore you with the details about all the court cases and measures already on the books against this kind of thing in other states, although the list is pretty long, except to say that if you're interested in the history of the wedge, I might do a video on it in the future, though several people here on YouTube already have excellent videos that go over the way in which some faith-based initiatives have been trying to put distance between evolution and the public school system. Their motives aside, the methods they've tried to do this by have been objectionable time and again, and it calls into question just how good of an idea it must be if it has to be backdoored into authority under the cover of misinformation, quote mining, fraud, and or fear. What might be more interesting to both the choir and those not already preached to is that this year in Mississippi, my home sweet home, a measure was proposed in the House of Representatives by Gary Chism, a Republican legislator representing Clay, Lowndes, and Oktibbeha counties. Chism's background is in insurance, and that's evident from his education and his occupation, and while I don't think that makes him unable to speak intelligently on the subject of science, I think it gives texture as to why he's failing at it so far. Similarly, Chism has been quoted by the limited press attention on this issue as saying things like either you believe in Genesis story or you believe that a fish walked on the ground, and we'll get to just how much of a misunderstanding or possibly a lie that is later on in the video. Chism is a member of a Baptist church in New Hope, and I haven't a thing to say about the quality of their beliefs, what they teach or why. This video is going to be about the science and language behind the disclaimer Chism proposed. Because what a sad commentary on our state it must be that with the exception of a few short articles on the matter, not all of them are reasonable either by the way, we'll cover that in a bit, there hasn't been much talk about the attempted hijacking of our educational system. Oh, Sid Salter did a piece where he quotes Superintendent of Education Henry Bounds, but it's a little bit vague as to where Bounds sits on the issue, saying that evolution is being taught already as a theory and not a fact. This is encouraging if he means that he stands behind the importance of scientific theory, and discouraging if he's using Chism's misleading explanation of the matter. Salter also says that Darwin's theory of evolution is a theory in crisis due to modern genetics, but that's also a little bit strange, because if there's anything evolutionists can agree on, it's that the theory of evolution most certainly doesn't belong solely to Darwin, and common ancestry has only been strengthened by advances in genetics. So all in all, the Clarion Ledger's coverage here is ambiguous. One can't tell if they have all the facts, or if they do, then how they're coming to their conclusions, and Bounds' opinion is a total freaking mystery. Ed Brayton from Dispatches from the Culture Wars delivered a fairly scathing review of the bill, calling it idiotic and educational malpractice, which, hey, that's spot on. Go, Ed, go. Galen Hawley from the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal chimed in, and while I appreciate his quotes from Chism where the legislator goes on to say that all those molecules didn't come into existence by themselves, incidentally that's a gross straw man we'll cover later, Hawley concedes that evolution is controversial and that many scientists will object to calling it that. But at the end of the day, he doesn't really pony up to that and fails to provide any reasons at all as why he thinks the disclaimer's fair, which he does say it's fair. That's either an unwillingness to show your hand full of bad cards or a lazy way of presenting an opinion. Either way, the article is at best a lukewarm explanation of the issue and probably didn't do much except further muddy the waters that quality journalism is supposed to clear. Adam Lynch from the Jackson Free Press captured another gem of a quote from Chism where he says that the fossil record doesn't show proof of evolution, and he doesn't believe that a fish decided to just come out of the water, grow legs, and live on land. And while not chiming in on either side, the JFP article was at least informative, so B+ to an A for Mr. Lynch for at least trying to get some attention on the matter. And special praise to Eric Dolan from the Hattiesburg American, who put the nail right on the head socially by talking about how this kind of weakening of our education system is the least timely thing we can do right now in light of an economic crisis in a global market. Past that, nothing. I catch the morning radio programs on Super Talk Mississippi each day, and sometimes it's listening to JT and Dave, and sometimes it's listening to Paul Gallo, and I haven't heard one thing about any of this. What a wasted medium. I realize there's only so much time, and there's a chance I just kind of missed it on the air, but I've heard about the traffic cameras and voter ID and Obama and bailouts and rotating doors of the same issues over and over and over again long enough to wonder if the record ever gets changed. Mississippi, and hello, yes, I pay taxes, guys, is at least in part troubled by this kind of thing. Turn it up to 11, fellas. You got the only amp that goes up that high around here. What's up with that? To all the biologists, geologists, physicists, chemists, scientists, and veterans of these evolutionist wars, I realize the wording of this bill is going to make you cringe, and forgive me for not covering every problem with it in the video. The language is heavily borrowed from other such measures taken in other states, which is obvious, and incidentally, that's awful lazy, Mr. Chism. Some might question, knowing that this bill died in committee 2 days before this video was filmed, why I'm bothering with the criticism. And hey, the guy said in the press that he's all for trying this sort of nonsense again. And if I can get a few more people informed before that atrocious affront to human intellect and progress hits the table in front of a somewhat different group of potential politicians that might just vote to waste our time with it, then I'm done a good thing. The body of House Bill 25 goes as such. The State Board of Education shall require every textbook that includes the teaching of evolution and its contents to include the following language on the inside front cover of the textbook. The word theory has many meanings, including systematically organized knowledge, abstract reasoning, a speculative idea or plan, or a systematic statement of principles. Scientific theories are based on both observations of the natural world and assumptions about the natural world, which that's kind of redundant. They are always subject to change in view of new and confirmed observations. This textbook discusses evolution, a controversial theory some scientists present as a scientific explanation for the origin of living things. No one was present when life first appeared on Earth, therefore any statement about life's origin should be considered a theory. Evolution refers to the unproven belief that random, undirected forces produce living things. There are many topics with unanswered questions about the origin of life which are not mentioned in your textbook, including the sudden appearance of the major groups of animals in the fossil record, known as the Cambrian explosion, the lack of new major groups of other living things appearing in the fossil record, the lack of transitional forms of major groups of plants and animals in the fossil record, and the complete and complex set of instructions for building a living body possessed by all living things. Study hard and keep an open mind. The word theory may have many meanings, but it most certainly doesn't have a meaning like abstract reasoning in disciplines like science. The theory of gravity, atomic theory, cell theory, plate tectonics, which is in fact also a theory. The list of theories used in science is long, and all point to a much more substantial definition than the one given by Chism. And I realize his wording is almost verbatim taken from other such disclaimers proposed in other states, but my old philosophy professor once told me if you're going to put your name to it, you're responsible for it. Even the other definitions sidetrack the discussion to misrepresent the premises for the argument from evolution. It's not just organized knowledge, though its knowledge base is well organized. It's not merely a speculative idea, though speculation is at the heart of any good science. And it's not simply a statement of principles, though it does state principles. This definition of the word theory could apply to a category of thought so broad as to include products of sciences like physics and chemistry, but also apply to things derived from softer sciences like psychology or political science. It could even apply to ideas engaged by disciplines that are not science at all, like philosophy or mathematics or British literature or astrology. There comes a point where your definition is in fact so broad that it ceases to actually define anything meaningful, and this one extends itself too far. If we're using the same term to define what engineers base their understanding of heat on, as fortune tellers base their understanding of metaphysical correspondence on, we're using the wrong term. This isn't a semantic game either. Several fields of study use terms specifically. It's a common practice. The general public may use diverse language, but most of the longest-standing bodies of thought use their own, less ambiguous terms to keep their communication from getting bogged down in games of who has a better dictionary. Going with philosophy, my one true love, when the average guy on the street uses the word reason, he usually means an excuse or single-step motivation for an action like Steve didn't have a reason to go to work that day. However, when philosophers get together and use the term in a philosophical context, that word may well get capitalized and mean something more specific, like the ideological embodiment of our logical and analytical faculties. And one couldn't use the general term to refute the more specific one without being a complete dunce. In science, theory is a strong term, and one that many philosophers wish they'd just capitalize and be done with, given how important it is. A scientific theory is an enduring, battle-hardened, resistant, verifiable, broadly explanative, coherent, testable description for observable natural phenomenon. It's that and a good deal more. The only real way of describing a scientific theory is by virtue of all the crushingly massive body of evidence for it, and the history of all the failed attempts to refute it. Which, if it's good science, means that all attempts to refute it have pointed toward it being true, as good little scientists ought to be trying to null the crap out of the thing in their experiments. That's not to say a theory can't be false, but to say that a theory has successfully overcome falsification by the thunderdome that is the scientific community to such an extent that it represents our best understanding of the data. Chism gives a nod to how scientific theories are based on assumptions, which would be a disingenuous way of saying that science takes a peculiar joy in proposing assumptions than watching them get blown out of the water in order to give us a less obstructed view of the actual terrain of natural phenomena. And he does mention that a scientific theory is subject to change. However, without mentioning how a theory resists that change, which, going back to Flannel's Thunderdome proposition of review, it gives the impression that any new assumption changes our best understanding of science when the process is much more brutal and aggressive. As we don't yet know which textbooks Mr. Chism is expecting to tack this misleading disclaimer to, we can't be sure whether the book in question merely discusses evolution or uses it to explain biology. A huge difference there, because if he's thinking of attaching it to books that talk about the theory of evolution in a historical or referential manner, then we run the risk of misrepresenting how important it is. A small intellectual crime and a minor ideological sin. But if he's thinking of attaching it to a proper biology textbook, which is likely, we run the risk of making the whole body of facts and explanations in that book look like merely propositional guesswork, as virtually nothing in biology makes any sense at all except via the theory of evolution.